Hello, fifth graders. Okay, so we're still in chapter 11, which is measurement and data. And today we're doing lesson 10, which is converting metric units of length. So the last three lessons we did last week were customary units. This week we're switching to metric. So this one is metric units of length. So let's take a look. Okay, our learning target for today is I can convert metric units of length within the same measurement system. So all the measurements we're working with today are metric units of length. Okay, here are the different measurements we're going to be looking at. We have millimeter, centimeter, meter, and kilometer. And then I put the abbreviations here because when you look at the practice problems, it does show the abbreviation of them. So millimeter is an easy one to remember. You have mm, millimeter, mm there. Then you have centimeter, cm, meter, it's a short one, meter is just m, and then kilometer is km. Okay, so this chart should look similar to the ones you saw last week. So this chart on the right shows whether you need to multiply or divide and what you need to multiply or divide by when you convert the metric lengths. So you can see kilometers, meters, centimeters, and millimeters, depending on where the arrow is pointing in which direction you're converting is whether you have to divide or multiply. And hopefully you notice here what kind of numbers you have. We have 10, 100, or 1,000, and we're going to look more at that. Okay, so here, directly from your book, are the different metric units of length. So you have centimeter, meter, kilometer, and millimeter. You have the different versions of it here. And then at the bottom, it shows you the smallest to the biggest. So the smallest out of all these is a millimeter, which is about as thick as a dime. So if you turn a dime sideways, how thick a dime is, that represents about what a millimeter is. The second one is a centimeter, which is about the width of your pinky finger. A meter is about the height of a doorknob. And then a kilometer is 6 city blocks. You can see that a kilometer gets a lot larger at the end. So you have the smallest of a millimeter, moving up to a centimeter, a meter, and a kilometer. And then just so you guys know, this is what you're gonna be using. You're gonna need to understand that these are the different measurements here. So just like the last lesson that I taught, I have it printed out next to me because as I'm doing example problems and as I'm solving, I need to make sure I know what measurements I need to solve the problem. So I have this printed out right next to me. If you want, you can pause the video or write these down so that you have them because these are necessary for us to know in order to solve the examples that we're gonna do. Okay, so before we start the actual examples, I wanna give you guys a reminder when it comes to powers of 10, because these next couple lessons that you're gonna have all deal with different powers of 10. And we have done this in the past throughout this year, but I wanna make sure I remind you about how this works. So let's start by looking at multiplying. So you guys can see here I have powers of 10. I have 10, I have 100 here, and I have 1,000. So we're gonna remind ourselves how these powers of 10 work when we're multiplying and dividing so that when we get to the conversions for these metric units, you understand what your responsibility is to convert them. Okay, so when we do this, first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna write down the number I have. I have 5 and 5/10. Okay, so this is the number I'm gonna be looking at. Okay, then I look, I'm multiplying. What does multiplying do to numbers? They make them larger. So in this case, we know this number is gonna get larger because we're multiplying, which means when I have a decimal, I'm gonna move it to the right. So now I know multiplying, my number gets bigger, I move it to the right. So now I'm gonna look, I'm multiplying by 10. 10 has 1 0, which means I'm gonna move that decimal one place because of that 1 0. So that means I'm simply gonna take this decimal, move it around one spot to the other side of the 5, and that's where my decimal is gonna go. So instead of 5 and 5/10, I have now changed this to simply 55. I don't have to put my decimal at the end, but we should know by now, putting that decimal there does not change it. This is our ones place, this is our tens place, whether we have the decimal there or not. Okay, looking at another multiplication problem, we still have 5 and 5/10, only this time we're multiplying it by 1,000. So multiplying means we are still making it larger and moving it to the right, but because we're multiplying it by 1,000, we are gonna move 3 spaces instead of the 1 for 10. So I have one number here, I can move it around the 5, but my problem is I don't have any more numbers to move around, which means I'm gonna need those placeholders. What do we use for placeholders, boys and girls? We use those zeros. So my decimal place is gonna go here, and I can see that I have 2 empty spots that I need those zeros in. So I'm gonna put my placeholders there. This is where my decimal ends up, so I'm gonna write this number out. And then I can look and see what I should have here. Okay, and then again, just like before, the decimal, if I want to put it there, is at the end, which means this answer should be 5,500. Okay, so those were our 2 examples of multiplying. Now let's look at dividing. So I have the number 5 that I'm dividing by 10. So I'm dividing this time, which means unlike multiplying, I'm not going to move to the right and make a number larger. I'm going to move to the left to make it smaller. And same thing as before, I'm doing 10, so I'm only going to move it 1 spot because of that 1 0. But, and I wanted to bring this up because some students I know get confused by this. Here's my problem. I don't see a decimal here. It's just the number 5. But remember, boys and girls, when you don't see the decimal, it's always at the end of the number. This 5 is in the ones place. The decimal is always to the right of the ones place. Now I can look, now that I know my decimal's there, I said division, we're going to move to the left. The 10 tells me I move 1 time, so we're simply going to move to the other side of the 5. So instead of the whole number 5, I have changed it to 5 tenths. Okay, and then one more division one. This time I have 5 and 5 tenths. I'm dividing again, which means I'm going to move it to the left and make the number smaller. So remember what division tells me. And then this is by 100, which means I'm going to move 2 spots. So 1 jump gets me around that first 5, and then just like over here when I have the empty spaces, I have to use that placeholder. So my decimal goes here, I put my placeholder there. This is where my decimal is now, so I can rewrite it. And I would get, instead of 5 and 5 tenths divided by 100 gives me 55 thousandths. And I can put that 0 in the front of the decimal if I want. Remember, that's something else that does not change the number. It is still 55 thousandths. Okay, so this was just a reminder about powers of 10. This should have been review. We have done this in past lessons and chapters. So let's move on to our conversions. Okay, so this is one quick reminder before we do the first example. I took this directly from what we've seen throughout all the other lessons you guys have done because it still applies to these lessons today. When you convert measurements, you change from one unit to another. To convert a larger unit to a smaller unit, you multiply, and to convert a smaller unit to a larger unit, you divide. Same as we've done in the past lessons. Okay, so our first example here, I'm going to read it to you. It says, one of the largest recorded pythons measures 7 3/10 meters long. What is the length of the python in centimeters? So we're going to convert 7 3/10 meters to centimeters. So like I told you before, I have my little chart next to me so I can make sure I look and see how many meters, how many centimeters are in 1 meter. Sorry about that. Okay. So what I need to make sure I know is that 1, and I'm going to use the abbreviation, M for meter. 1 meter is equal to 100, and then the abbreviation for centimeters, cm. So I need to use this measurement, which I have next to me, in order to solve this. So we already know we did it by 100, but how do we know and why are they multiplying? Well, we have to make sure we understand. We are going from meters to centimeters here. So I have to know which one is larger. If I look at my chart, I can see that a meter is larger than a centimeter, which means I start with a larger unit. Again, just like we looked on the last slide, when I start with a larger unit, I multiply. And then because I have this measurement here, that's why I'm multiplying by 100, because 1 meter equals 100 centimeters. Just like we did with the practice, I don't have to use this if I don't want to. What I can do is I can look here at the side. Oops, 7 3/10. I'm multiplying, so my number is going to get bigger. I'm multiplying by 100, so I'm going to move my decimal over 2 places. That empty spot gives me the 0 I need. So my answer should be 730. So 7 3/10 meters is the same as 730 centimeters, which tells me that the python is 730 centimeters long. And then it says right here, to multiply by 10, 100, or 1,000, use basic facts and count the number of zeros in the factors, which is exactly what we just did. Okay, let's move on and look at our next problems. Okay, so here we have a couple problems we're gonna do together to make sure we've got this down. We have some different types of measurements here. So on this one, we're going from centimeters to meters. So that's similar to the one that we just did, only the last one we were doing meters to centimeters, which means we need to know that 1 meter, and I won't do this for all of them, I just wanna make sure you guys know, I am looking at that pink chart. I have it right next to me because I don't wanna forget what measurement is equal to what. Okay, so what I need to understand, and I can look at my chart and see, because I know a millimeter is the smallest, then it goes centimeter, then meter, and kilometer. So I need to ask myself, is a centimeter a smaller unit or a bigger unit than a meter? Well, a centimeter is smaller. So because I'm starting with a smaller unit, this one means I'm going to divide. So I'm going to divide my 700 divided by the 100. Okay, just like we were practicing before with our powers of 10, I'm dividing, which means I'm going to make my number smaller by 2 places because of the 100. So we ran into this problem with our examples. I don't see a decimal on here, but that doesn't mean the decimal's not there. It's after the ones place or at the end of the number, which means it's right here. So I'm going to move 2 places to the left because I'm dividing by 100. So 1, 2. My decimal ends up right in that spot, which would leave me with the whole number 7. So 700 centimeters is equal to 7 meters. Okay, let's look over here at number 4. 8,500 millimeters equals how many meters? I'm looking over at my chart and I can see that millimeters is smaller. So again, just like this one, I will be dividing. So that means I'm going to divide 8,500 by something, but I need to figure out how many millimeters are in 1 meter. And if I look over here, there are 1,000 millimeters in a meter. So that means I'm going to divide by 1,000, boys and girls. When I have 1,000, how many zeros are there? Say it out loud in your house. That's right, there are 3 zeros in 1,000. And again, because we're starting with that smaller measurement, we're going to be dividing. So I'm going to move 3 spots, and remember my decimal, if I don't see it where it's at, I'm going to move it 3 spots to the left because I'm dividing. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Oh, it puts it right on top. So I'm going to replace that comma actually with a decimal. And I end up with 8 5/10. Okay, let's continue on. Okay, now we are doing 15 kilometers equals how many meters? I'm looking over at my chart. Oh, and a kilometer is definitely the largest because it's the largest measurement we're working with today for metric units of length. So kilometers are the largest. This time I'm starting with a larger unit. And remember, when I start with a larger unit, I multiply. But I need to know what I multiply by. So I'm looking over at my chart. And 1 kilometer, I'm gonna write it over here just so you guys can see it. 1 kilometer, km, is equal to 1,000 meters. 1,000. Sorry for my funny zeros here. 1,000 meters. Okay, which means I'm gonna take 15, and I'm not dividing this time because kilometers is a larger unit, so we're gonna multiply. We're going to multiply 15 times 1,000. So if I remember my zeros here, if I don't see it, I don't have any numbers to move around, which means all 3 of those empty spaces are going to be my placeholders with 0, which means my 15 times 1,000 is equal to 15,000. Just put those in there. Okay, we're almost there. We got one more problem on this page. Okay, we have 73,000 meters is equal to how many kilometers? So look at, if I look at number 5, they literally just flip-flopped it here. We did kilometers to meters, now we're doing meters to kilometers, which means we're gonna divide again because now we're starting with a smaller unit instead of the bigger one. And we can use the same measurement here. 1 kilometer equals 1,000 meters. That's the same one we need for this one. Only because we switched it, instead of multiplying on this one, we are going to divide. Okay, when we divide, we move our decimal over to the left to make it smaller. And because we have 1 kilometer equals 1,000 meters, we're going to move 3 times. So my decimal's here. Oh, and it looks like we're going to run into the same thing here. So 1, 2, 3. We run into that decimal again like we did on number 4. So instead of it being 73,000, we just end up with the whole number 73. Okay, we're good on this page. We're gonna do a couple more examples. Let's look at our comparing. Okay, we're gonna do a couple of comparing problems here. Make sure we get our thing on here. Okay, so we're gonna use greater than, less than, or equal to make these make these sentences true statements. So on this one, we have centimeters compared to millimeters. So we can either decide to turn centimeters into millimeters or the millimeters into centimeters. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn these centimeters into millimeters, which means I'm gonna have 30 centimeters, and I have to figure out how many millimeters that would equal. So I'm gonna look at my chart and I can see that centimeters is bigger, which means I'm gonna multiply. So I'm gonna multiply 30 by something, but I don't know what to multiply 30 by. I look at my chart and I see that there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter, which means I'm gonna multiply it by 10. Okay, we can use our decimal trick and we can look. 30, my decimal's at the end. If I multiply, it's gonna make a number bigger, and by 10, I move it over 1 spot, which would make it 300. So 30 centimeters is the same, boys and girls, as 300 millimeters. That is what I converted it to. So if I look at it, now I can compare it. Oh, 300 millimeters to 300 millimeters. Oh, well, in fact, they end up being equal. Okay, let's look at number 12. Okay, so I have kilometers compared to meters. Okay, on this one, what I'm gonna do is I would rather multiply than divide. So I'm gonna turn these 4 8/10 kilometers into meters. So kilometers, and we're gonna convert this into the meters that we need because we need them both to be the same measurement in order to properly compare them to each other. Oh, that K is a little funny. Okay, so I'm gonna look over at my chart and I see that 1 kilometer is equal to 1,000 meters. And because I'm starting with the bigger measurement, I'm gonna multiply. So I'm gonna multiply 4 8/10 by 1,000. I'm multiplying, which means my decimal is gonna move to the right. And because it's 1,000, I'm gonna move it 3 times. So 1 time gets us around the 8, 2, 3, my decimal goes there. Add my zeros. Sorry, the zeros are a little funny. So I converted the 4 8/10 kilometers to 4,800 meters. Oh my gosh, well, look at that again. These just happen to be 4,800 meters is equal to 4,800 meters. So we've got 2 that ended up being equal to each other. Okay, let's look down below and let's do some dividing instead. So on this one, just like number 12, we again have kilometers compared to meters. Instead though, I think I'm gonna take my meters and turn it into kilometers instead. Let's do some dividing instead. But either way you guys would wanna do it, you can choose. You just have to make sure that each side is turned into the same measurement. You can change either one you want. So this one, I'm gonna change the meters into kilometers. So I'm rewriting it so I can look at it properly. Okay, and because we're starting with meters, meters is the smaller unit, which is why we're gonna divide. And I'm gonna take that 8,500, and I'm not gonna write the comma in there because we probably have to get rid of it anyway. So I know my decimal's at the end when I don't see it after the ones place. And 1 kilometer is equal to 1,000 meters, which means I'm gonna move it to the left because I'm dividing 3 times. 1, 2, 3, put it right there. So that means 8,500 meters is the same as 8 5/10 of a kilometer. So now I can compare it. Okay, I can see this. What's bigger, 9 kilometers or 8 5/10 kilometers? Well, 9 kilometers is about half a kilometer larger, so it is greater than. Okay, last problem here for you boys and girls. On this one, we've got meters compared to centimeters. Let's do another dividing one here. So that means I'm gonna take my centimeters because I know that centimeters is smaller. And I'm gonna turn the centimeters into meters. So 145 centimeters. And I want to convert that into my same as my other measurement, which is meters. So centimeters is the smaller measurement, which is why I'm going to divide. So I'm going to take, and I'm going to do it up here. Sorry, I'm running out of space. So I'm going to do 145. But what am I going to divide it by? So I look over at my chart here, and 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters, which means I'm dividing by 100. Boys and girls, tell me, how many times do I have to move my decimal if I'm dividing by 100? 2, because there's 2 zeros in 100. So I'm going to move 1 spot around the 5 and then 1 more spot around the 4. Okay, so that means now that I have my decimal there, I changed 145 centimeters to 1 45/100 meter. Okay, so now I have them equal to each other with their meters. So now I can figure out, okay, is 1 5/10 bigger or 1 45/100? And this brings up a good point, boys and girls. Keep in mind, just because 45 may seem bigger does not mean it is. If I look at the place values to compare, okay, if I look at the ones place, okay, a 1 and a 1, that doesn't help me. Then I look at the next place value, 5 and 4. Well, 5 is bigger than a 4, so I stop right there, and I know that 1 5/10 of a meter is larger, it's greater than. Remember, boys and girls, some of us make this mistake sometimes. Don't look at the 5 compared to the 45 and say, oh, 45 is bigger. That's not how we compare numbers, especially when we go into decimals, so keep that in mind. Okay, so there's our examples for today. Let's look at what your assignments are after you watch this video. Oh, I guess one more thing, sorry, I forgot. So make sure this is the chart that I have next to me right now. This is all the comparisons I was looking at. And to remember what the smallest to the biggest unit is on here. And here's your little cheat sheet for you on what you need to do, multiply or divide, and what you multiply or divide by when you're converting those measurements. Here's your assignments. So after you watch this video, go complete your lesson 10 reteach page, and then make sure you work on your teacher assigned lessons for metric length on both iReady and Prodigy. Okay, make sure you reach out to your teacher, ask during office hours if you have any questions about this lesson. Otherwise, see you for the next one.